Where to now for Auckland Council's failed proposal to build more houses on less land in some parts of the city. Last night, councillors voted to dump last-minute changes to the city's unitary plan, which would have allowed increased housing density to accommodate for a projected population boom. The vote means the proposal won't be part of the case Auckland Council takes to the panel considering the city's blueprint for the next few decades, but it also means the Auckland Council could be unrepresented in all of this. The debate is driving an intergenerational divide, some people are saying, between property owners wanting to protect their biggest asset and those who say intensification is the only way they will ever be able to afford to buy a house in Auckland. Joining me now in the studio is financial analyst Bernard Hickey from The Hive, who was at the meeting last night. Bernard, welcome. I have a sense that you were taken aback by the behaviour in the meeting last night. Can you describe it for us?
Yeah, I was surprised at how the residents from the east of Auckland shouted down the young people who were simply arguing that they wanted to be part of Auckland, to be able to get onto the property ladder and to have some affordable housing. But they weren't allowed to say their piece in quiet. They were shouted down by a largely old and very angry audience in the room.
Because as I read the word intergenerational in the intro, I slightly balked from it. I thought, is it simply that polarised? But did you have a sense that that was the case? The fors and against divided on age lines?
Yeah, we really saw the difference between the old Auckland, who lived in houses on sections in those leafy suburbs on the isthmus, versus the new Auckland. Young people, often from Pacifica, Māori and Asian backgrounds, who simply want to get onto the ladder to build their own families, albeit in an apartment, not on a section. And that's what this debate is about. Should Auckland be allowed to grow and handle the 1 million people that are going to come over the next 30 years? And how does the city organise itself to allow those apartments to be built? And a group of people last night literally shouted down the young people who are arguing for this.
I want to take the point that Richard Burton makes from Auckland 2040, so opposition obviously. Richard made the point this morning on Morning Report that there are plenty of other areas already zoned for high-density housing. He uses the example of Takapuna, of course, where high-density apartments and townhouses can go already. He says last night's decision only concerns the very small amount of land which was rezoned under the late changes, which is largely suburban and no good for apartments anyway.
Well, that's what he says. But the arguments that the independent hearings panel and the planners at the Auckland Council put was that this set of maps that they put forward in December was the best way to reach the targets that Auckland needs. Remember, Auckland needs to find places for 280,000 extra houses or dwelling units, including apartments, in the next 30 years, somewhere within the old boundaries of Auckland Council. And that's been agreed by the Council and by the Independent Hearings Panel, and actually, by the way, by the government. So Housing New Zealand Corp, which is headed by Bill English, and Nick Smith have made referrals. They've asked the Independent Hearings Panel to make Auckland more dense, to intensify it so it can handle these people. Auckland needs 280,000 houses. The old plan, the one that the council just reverted to, only really allows 80,000 houses. So they're 200,000 houses short. And that's according to the Independent Hearings Panel's own modelers, the experts, the people, remember, who look at this stuff. They've gone through the models, they've looked at what's economically viable, and they say those old maps, the ones the council's just gone back to, will only come up with 80,000 houses. Auckland is now going to be 200,000 houses short over the next 30 years. And as Bill English said today, this imposes a cost on the rest of New Zealand. Higher interest rates than need to be the case, higher costs in rent subsidies, about $2 billion a year. And then, of course, there's the inequality.
And the rent subsidies are going from the government to landlords.
That's right. He's pointed out.
Actually, that's not often discussed. Can you say that figure again?
Yeah. So $2 billion is what New Zealand taxpayers pay to landlords, and to be fair, to make sure that people can stay in Housing New Zealand houses or other social housing. $2 billion that taxpayers in Gore or Gisborne or wherever pay, and it's mostly going into Auckland.
Okay, so what is going to be the outcome of the council's decision last night?
Well, the shocking thing now is that it's going to be very difficult for the councillors and particularly the 13 who voted down
Yeah.
the Dean's plan, to then agree to an independent hearings panel recommendation in July or August. August is when the vote's likely to happen. Remember, that'll be 6 weeks before the council elections. And that's the problem here. The precedent was set last night to stop a unitary plan which would allow these new houses to be built. And that's a cost that's going to be borne by all of New Zealand for decades to come, not to mention the generations who don't have a vote in this election, or the people who already live here and choose not to vote. And that was something that Bill English pointed out today, and which is pointed out by the government in its submissions to the Independent Hearings Panel.
Bernard Hickey, financial analyst from The Hive. Thank you so much for joining us, Bernard.